Welcome to Race Matters. I am our co-host, Jeff Baker, and I am joined by my co-host, Eddie Carson. And like we do every episode, we lean into the nomenclature of exploring race, class, gender, culture, and those issues that seem to divide us, but allow us space to listen, learn, and to bridge our divides. And today, as always, we're coming to you from WJOP, Joppa Radio, 96.3 FM, Newburyport, Massachusetts.
Folks, we're excited to have you join us, and we're excited about our guest, bit of a local legend in the North Shore of Massachusetts. And one of the things I want to say is, man, this brother here can just lean into some really good funk and all of that stuff. So what I'm going to do is I just want to introduce our guests here and everything. John Burciaga, who is a soul brother. He's had a fabulous, career experiences, things that I think will resonate with a lot of folks, but a lot of things that will make this episode super interesting. One of the things about John is that he was his early ministry as a Baptist in Missouri, brought about layers of conflict, and some of those conflicts are very, very real for him. That kind of really shaped his poetry and the things that he does, particularly with dealing with conflict with the KKK, especially within the church he served. At one point, he resigned upon cancellation of his invitation to the pulpit in exchange for a Black pastor. And I mean, again, that's just soul brother work that's there and everything too. John became a Unitarian Universalist in Pennsylvania and ran afoul with the members who were opposed to the Vietnam War. Right? John has just kind of done all kind of justice work and thinking about a lot of folks, particularly for the fact that he joined the NAACP, served as a vice president for the housing chair, and really kind of delved into some different experiences. There's something that I can say, just speaking for myself firsthand, ways in which, I've had to engage with the police department, and some of those experiences have come across, especially during this time in Baltimore. And that was on his way to Brother King. That's right. You heard me right. Martin Luther King's funeral, where he had this interaction that took place a number of years ago. John identifies as a Mexican-American. And of course, in Arizona, he was honored by the Mexican consulate to work with immigrants in that particular state. Currently, the brother is a columnist. He's an author. He writes regularly for the daily newspaper of the North Shore of Boston, where he addresses a number of issues that deal with social justice. We are thrilled to have this brother join us here on the show. As you can tell, just some fantastic stuff. John, welcome to the fold of Race Matters, my friend.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with both of you.
Man, well, we're excited. Hey, I'm gonna go ahead and get started here. And thinking about your bio, your experience, and all the things that you've shared with us. Take us back to when you were younger, just for a second, and thinking about your own racial identity and the struggles as a Mexican-American man living in this country. What was that like for you? And then when did you become fully aware of your own racial identity?
Yeah, my father and his father fought in the Mexican Civil War, often called the Mexican Revolution, which, by the way, their Civil War was three times longer than ours. But my father, like any terrible war, he didn't want to talk about it, and so he didn't give me that gift of my legacy in terms of that until I got along later. But I remember being in school, I was treated differently because everybody was light-skinned, curly-headed, short hair, wavy hair, and there I was with that straight hair and brown skin and everything. And I didn't realize why that caused a couple of things. Some of the girls thought I was cute. But a lot of the guys didn't like me. They didn't like the way I looked. They didn't want me to be part of their group. So I was kind of kept out, and I had to on my own dig into my family's past, and to realize that my father and his father fought in that revolution, and that my maternal grandfather fought, believe it or not, for the South in our Civil War. That's my grandfather, not my great grandfather or great great. But he was a lot older than my grandmother. And so suddenly I began to realize I'm part of this history that nobody wants to talk about. And so gradually and over the years, I began to realize what that was, and I began to identify more with other people of color.
Mm.
And so that by the time I hit the ministry and got into the pulpit and began to have trouble and realized that they were ex-KKK in my church, and I mean, they would yell out at me during the service for what I would say. They would yell at me and from the pulpit and slam their fist onto the pews and things like that. And then when I invited that black brother to have a pulpit exchange with me, at first the deacon said, "Okay, let's do it." The word got out to the rest of the congregation, and it was no go. And so the deacons came back together and said, "No, we're not going to do this." And somebody said, "Yes, because we're hearing that some of our members will burn down this historic old church." And I said, let them. If they do, we point at that and say, "You can't tell me that there's not racism in this town." That's going to be a badge of honor if we do that. I lost that whole thing. But the funny thing was, they didn't want me to leave. They just wanted me to shut up about race. So I said, "Okay, I'm out of here." And that's when I left, nowhere to go. And so I investigated Unitarian Universalism.
Mm.
So that
John,
was my
John,
first brush.
where was that? Where were you in your life during that season?
That was in southeast Missouri, about halfway between St. Louis and Memphis. I grew up in Cape Girardeau, which is where Rush Limbaugh is from and his family. But this was in the little town of Marble Hill, Missouri.
That's interesting. And again, we have some geographical roots in that area, spent some time just geographically, right? Not in exact proximity there too.
Yeah.
That's there. It's interesting hearing your narrative in terms of the way you think about standing up against oppression and the way resistance works and everything like that. And yet you made a comment about how they didn't want you to leave, they just wanted you to shut up.
Yeah.
Does that seem kind of familiar though when we talk about the dynamics of oppression, resistance, and race today? And in many ways, it feels like some things just hadn't really changed from you or that brother back then fighting the good fight.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what was the question to that again? I'm sorry.
The difference. What do you think? Have anything really shifted much? The similarities to today?
Oh, no.
What are your thoughts on that?
No. And I am so surprised at how little progress we have actually made. We started making some, and then it seems like we have reversed it since that time, because a lot of things happened back during what we call the civil rights movement and Dr. King and all those people. But and now in recent years, we've taken a big step backwards. No doubt about it.
You
John,
know, Go ahead, Jeff.
when you went on your search for your next spiritual home,
Mhm.
can you describe that transition from the Southern Baptist roots that you had and where you ministered, and that trajectory that led you to the Unitarian Church?
Yeah, I lost my confidence in the Christian faith. Now, that's probably a mistake because that's certain people who did things that made me lose my confidence in it. But when I tried to get the institution to change, they they wanted just to sit back and say, "Look, we don't want any trouble. So, yes, John, why don't you shut up and then everything will be okay?" And that was unacceptable to me. So, uh, yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say about that because I lost my faith and I thought I'm going to start over. And Unitarian Universalism gave me the chance to reform my values and the way that I express them religiously. And I've changed quite a bit from that now. I'm much more secularist at this point. I'm totally away from the sense of the church being a reforming institution, which is what I had hoped it would be when I first started out.
Were your folks Baptists back in the day? Were they religious folks? Is this kind of an evolution that you took on your own? And of course, obviously, you've changed over a period of time.
My mother was she became Baptist. She was at first Campbellite in Kentucky, and then she became Southern Baptist. And she was a member of the church in my hometown for 72 years, and she raised all us children. My father was Roman Catholic, and he would not go back to the church because he and his father had to fight against their church in Mexico because the church was supporting, the establishment, and they were on the side of the rebels. And of course, down there, the rebels won. And so my father wouldn't do it. It wasn't until his later years when he saw me become a Baptist minister and he came to me and said, "Well, do you think I should just go ahead and join the Baptist church?" And I said, "No, I don't think you should, Dad. I don't think you're a Baptist. I don't think you want to be a Baptist. You're doing this for me." And so I said, "Look, I think your family, since that's what you know is your Mexican Catholicism, I'll take you back to the Catholic Church." So I did. I went back and took him to church, and we went to church services, and he took some instruction, and he died a Mexican Catholic, and his family and his family in Mexico, which is a cast of thousands, was so happy about that. And he was okay with it. I don't think he was ever a real believer in that either, quite frankly.
John, just because Ed and I like to note these loops, you used a term back there just a minute ago about how your mom was a Campbellite in Kentucky. That's a term for our listeners that can also refer to the Restoration Movement churches called the Churches of Christ. And that is the tradition in which I grew up. That's the tradition in which Ed and I both went to college, but we have both had transitions and trajectories that have led us into other fields. So it's just fascinating to see how all of these American stories can tie together in some really fascinating ways sometimes.
Small world, isn't it?
It's a very small world. Yes, indeed.
Brother, being in the North Shore, spending time at Newburyport, and you're quite the figure, the leader, the voice in that area and everything too. What is it like for you being Mexican American, being a person of color in a predominantly white environment, a predominantly white space? How have you felt that you've been received, your voice in that area?
Well, I am thoroughly anglicized. My father did not teach me Spanish. He did not really, as I've said before, he did not let me in on exactly what being Mexican and Mexican American. We took several trips down to Mexico to meet his family, and it was like they were people from the dark side of the moon, and they probably thought I was too. But yeah, I've had no problem. People accept me really as anglicized. And I'm outgoing, I'm social, I have a very social wife and so forth. So, we get along fine. We get along fine. And so when I go into anything that I'm trying to make some ground on or to gain something in terms of justice, I always work on their accepting me first, and then I sell my product, so to speak. So no, I get along fine. No problem with that at all. I have lots of friends and her friends that I inherited, so that's okay. No problem.
The
My most extreme experience, Eddie, was that trip to Baltimore. And sometime if we can get into that, I will. But that's something that should be said here.
No, you brought it up, brother. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Please tell the story.
Go for it.
Okay. Now I was part of the NAACP in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, that chapter. And Dr. King was murdered, and of course he was a hero to everyone. So we right away gathered some officers, and so three young black men and I was the older, but I was only in my 30s, early 30s, and we took off late one night to go to the King funeral. And uh, we were all very tired, and I was sleeping in the back seat, and Willard Howard, the president, took the wheel, and somehow he drove off the interstate into Baltimore, which was under curfew. And as we drove down into there, we realized we were lost. There was one-way streets, and we thought we we better follow the law. So we drove a while and finally said, "Well, how the hell do we get back up on the freeway?" And so suddenly we made a turn right into a cordon of Baltimore's finest.
Mhm.
And there we were. I mean, they were just like a wall across there. Well, they stopped and they yanked me out of the car. They never said a word to my black friends. They slammed me up face first against my car and began asking me what was I doing there? Who was I? And I don't know how many times they asked me, and it was a scary thing. And I knew that if I fought back or if I yelled or whatever, that I was putting my colleagues in danger. So everything I answered was in a very calm voice as much as I could. And then, I was slammed in the back with the butt end of a billy club. And and I realized that things were going to get very, very bad because they weren't believing. Suddenly, one of them said, "What kind of a name is that? That Burciaga?" Well, now these were good old boys, and this was the time of Shabazes and Muhammads and people like that. And one of them said, "Well, is that a Muslim name?" And they asked me, "What's your name?" And I said, "You figure it out. I'm not going to tell you what my name is," because I thought if I said I was Mexican, that'd be even worse for me or something like that. So finally, something came up on the radios with them. Something else was going on in Baltimore, and it was more serious than just having a bunch of scared kids there. So the main guy said he started barking orders. He said, "Here you go. You get out of here. You go here, 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 and you turn there and you turn there, and you get out of here and don't come because if we catch you again, it's going to be bad for you." So I took the wheel again and we started driving, and I said to them, "Do you have any idea what he said about how we get out of here?" And they said, "No, we couldn't tell." And we realized he didn't want us to get out of there. He wanted us to get caught again. And so we started driving, and down these broad avenues in Baltimore, on every street corner, there was a guardsman with a long gun and a pistol and a dog, a very big dog. And so as we passed by them, we thought, well, we got to ask one of these guys where the highway is. So I stopped in the middle of the street and I said, "Willie, just ask the guy where the ramp is." And so he rolled down the window and said, "Where's the ramp? Where's the highway?" And the guy pointed with him, pointed down the way and said, "You turn here and turn there." It sounded pretty simple. And then Willie said, "How you doing?" and that the guy yelled, "Wait a minute, hold on." Now, I just peeled out. I peeled out as fast as I could in the
Right.
car, made the turns, and sure enough, there was the overpass. And as I went over to go under it and go up the ramp, it was blocked. They had it all blocked off. And I said, "We have no choice, guys. I've got to go up the down ramp and get on the wrong side of the because there were no other cars. I mean, everybody was staying out of the way." So I started up the down ramp, and suddenly coming down towards me was a vehicle full of National Guardsmen.
Mhm.
And there was no room for two of us. So I had to move over and be careful not to fall off the ramp. And my right wheels just digging into to chat and dirt and everything. And it all happened so quickly that they didn't know what to think, and we didn't know what to think. And suddenly we were past them, got up on heading south on the north interstate, and taking a breath, no other cars around, no lights coming at us. And we said, we got to find a way to cross the highway. So We went a little bit farther, but it was too deep. The median was too deep. And finally, we saw ahead of us, way down in the distance, there were headlights. We didn't know it was going to be a state trooper or what. So we looked for the shallowest place that we could, and I took off across the median, and we were bouncing. We didn't know if the car was going to turn over or what. And we managed to get over to the other side and started going south on the south lane. And nobody said anything for a long time. And suddenly Willie said, "You sure do know how to talk soft to those police, don't you?"
Mhm.
And then they all burst into laughter. And I was still shaking. And as we got down the road, they stopped laughing. Then one of them said, "Now look, now you know what it's like. This is what we put up with all the time, and not as lucky as we were right now." And that was the biggest lesson of that Baltimore trip. It was just amazing. And so that was it. And after that, I was really a brother to them. They felt like I had passed the test, I guess. So I hope that's okay to relate that, because it is an unusual story, and I don't tell it very often. And when I do, people say, "My God, man, you ought to write that down." But I haven't. I've never written it down.
Go ahead, Jeff.
No, Eddie, please go ahead.
Well, no, I was just curious, real quick. I just want to jump in. Has that story been reflected in your any of your poetry at all, or you've had nothing to do
No,
with it?
no, it hasn't. My poetry's been about other things. But um, I don't know how to do that. I guess I've got to think about that. Um, because I still question to myself, is that really important to tell at this point in my life? What do you think, Eddie? Is that something that would be important to really share when so much else is going on right now?
I mean, I had a couple of thoughts here, and I want to put this back on Professor Baker here, particularly as the white anti-racist in this space here, who walk step by step with people who look like us. That people of color, we all have those stories, and we have those stories that haunt us for a long time. Many of my stories I continue to talk about. When I first met my wife many moons ago, I would tell her about my experiences, and I can still remember the day driving through Mississippi, headed back from Arkansas to Alabama, being pulled over. And while I was pulled over, I had a lot of books and things in the back seat. I think I had some baggy clothes on because I was traveling. I remember the cop asking me to, spread my legs and my arms up against the car as he gave me a pat down, asking about the baggy clothes and the books and do I have a gun on me, right? And just all those elements that are there, and they stay with you because you think about those stories all the time, and I've said this before too. We have a rule in my house, me being married to a white sister, and this is her rule. One, we never, ever, ever, under any circumstance, call the police. That is rule number one. Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, since we're just coming off Halloween, they could be right outside our house, and under no circumstance are we allowed to call the cops. We have rules when I get into the car, when I drive. Oftentimes, and part of it is I don't see very well these days. I don't drive a whole lot, but about who drives and who doesn't drive. And so it's just this dawning reality that we have these rules that I am constantly sharing with my white brothers, sisters, and non-binary folks and my friends. And I love those who lean into me, folks like Professor Baker here, really with that empathetic ear, kind of like stepping back and listening and hearing what that means. Oftentimes, telling me that that's not their story. That's there. So to answer your question, I think it's important that we share those stories. We remind folks that just because it's the 21st century, right, and we see these things happening, just because people believe that, Black Lives Matter is behind us, and we've all of a sudden forgotten about George Floyd and all the victimizations and things that are happening, we should move forward. And I think that should be our passion. Unfortunately, we're in this age of censorship and fear, where people sometimes are afraid to tell those stories that are there. Professor Baker, your thoughts on this from people of color as you're hearing this?
John, you said something very, very important, I think, earlier, is that things haven't changed, or they have changed, or they move this way and they move back. And I strongly believe that stories are maybe the most important thing that ever really advance justice. We can have, I don't need to tell you this, but since we're in this conversation and Carson asked, I think that it is the witness of individual stories of people with real credible relationships that move people's hearts more than merely having a really well constructed argument. I'm a white man who is Christian and straight and grew up in the Deep South and am now back in the Deep South. And for me, as a person of faith as well, it was the stories and the witness of people that I know and love that have moved and illuminated me more than any other thing. I think we can read treatises. I think we can talk about politics. I think we can talk about policy. But I think in our real lived political experience, the thing that moves us most are the stories and the witness of the people that we know and love. And earlier, you just talked about your winsome entree into lots of communities means that you can sell your goods. And I think your goods are the story that you can tell. And so I always think it's very important for everybody to tell their story, no matter how close and how personal, or perhaps even like extremely hyper local, because that contributes to the great overwhelming sense of what story does as our national moment. And then understanding that I grew up with beloved family members and colleagues who were police officers, and I was always taught to address the police as if they were the servants who would help, who were the heroes who would come. If you need help, to call them, to rely on them. And to this day, my family, my friends, my colleagues are many of them are police officers, and I have a way of interacting with them. And it took hearing other people's experiences about the talk and the experience and their interactions with police forces generally, to help me recognize that it is a vastly more complicated experience for Americans coming at this from every single angle.
Jeff, I have to thank you for that, because you know something, I know that stories are important, and I've told very many stories. Then so what is it about that experience that I just related that makes me hesitant to tell it, or as Eddie suggested, put it into poetry? There's something deep in there that is scary to me. There's something deep in there that makes me wonder what else I could have done, but I know I did the right thing in not reacting to the police. Now, on the other hand, in spite of that, I'm the kind of person who will treat law enforcement with great respect. They tell me to do something, I do it. Unlike Eddie, if something happens, I would call the police. That's the difference, that's the difference. Because his side of things is quite averse to mine. So, but thank you for that reset. You've given me some reset, and maybe I need to think about that and dig into that story and do something with it.
I came back to Alabama from 12 years in Los Angeles. I'm flying back to Southern California tomorrow for an engagement. And I know a lot of my friends, neighbors, and people who are under the gun right now, literally, by being accosted by federal law enforcement because of their race. The Supreme Court has now said that it is an available reason to stop someone.
Yes.
And in Los Angeles County, which is majority Mexican American, Hispanic American, and where 1 million out of 10 million people are undocumented, then race becomes a reason to stop people on the street. And our Supreme Court this year has said that police can use that as a basis. So I think your story resonates, and I think your story resonates to this moment right now.
Something to think about.
We're not going to assign you a poem by the end of the night, though, but thank you for your thoughtfulness.
I mean, it's I'm embarrassed. I'm running this book across my head, that I read a year ago, and one of the things that it talks about is the ways in which, particularly people of color, and how we think about trauma. We this lizard brain that's just kind of there, and the things that we kind of continue to search for and overcome. And we do these things in different ways, and we navigate those things in different ways. And brother, what I'll say to you is, I think your story, as you're sharing here on 96.3, is absolutely fantastic. Something I think people will probably sit back and they'll think, "Wow, that's incredible! What an experience!" You know, and of course, you're always going to have those folks who roll their eyes at our narratives and our stories too. And you know, and our job is really to lean into levels of empathy. And you know, and speaking of leaning in and everything too, you were a busy man last night. I mean,
Mm.
you know, kind of working, kind of helping with the elections that are happening and everything too. How did last night go for you?
It went very well as it turned out, but we were concerned there, Eddie, because you know Newburyport and you know what a liberal colony it is, artistic colony, and somehow that what's going on in the nation has came to visit us, and people were turning against each other, liberals against liberals, progressives against progressives. It was awful. And then suddenly it all fell into place last night. The right people were elected 100%, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, it was a long day. And you know, and thanks for waiting for me because you had written me around 5:30 and I didn't get back to you around 11.
Oh, my friend, look, I was still upgrading and doing some shuffling and everything too. So that's not a problem at all. You know, but when we think about a place like Newburyport, Massachusetts, we think that it's kind of a monolith. Everyone kind of thinks alike. They're the same, maybe in their political attitudes, their behaviors, all of those things. Whether you're rooting for this mayor of Newburyport or that mayor of Newburyport and everything too. Do you feel that community, Newburyport and that North Shore, is moving in the right direction when we think about this sense of community? The fact that someone who looks like us, maybe Brother Jeff Baker, Professor Baker, who is a deep Southerner who may want to take a sojourn up there, and inviting him into the fold. How does that community feel to you?
Yeah, you know, I got to say that last night was thankfully it was a reset because I think if it had gone on that way, we were going to be in trouble. And somehow the way things came back together, we know it's going to be all right. We've come back to our senses. I just sensed that very much last night. Um, Now you've been to Newburyport. You know, you were very popular in Newburyport.
I
Uh,
I I, I enjoyed my time there. Yes.
yeah, I mean, you would come in and you would turn things upside down, and it was okay. It was okay. But there again, you sold yourself. Now, I'm not saying you intentionally were trying to sell yourself, but there's something about you that sells. I'll put it that way.
I've known Professor Carson for 32 years, and that is a universal experience. So
Yeah,
let me rise in praise of my friend who
yeah.
does that.
He's a
For
ball of
someone who
fire.
is for someone who has never been, without getting into the weeds of the politics, it's a curious thing because I've seen this happen in places where the politics can seem like there's a fairly good sense of cohesion or at least consensus, but then even those relationships can break down. So without stoking division, for someone who is outside of your community, can you try to diagnose what you think happened and then how you think it resolved? Because I think there might be some really interesting lessons. Because as Will Rogers once said, he belongs to no Will Rogers said, I belong to no organized political party. I'm a Democrat. And left-leaning folks are prone to infighting. So can you talk a little bit about how you saw that relationship swing in your community this year?
Something happened, and it sort of steamrolled. And to me, the way I think of it is a fever. People got a fever, and all of a sudden, the fever went away because something else happened and the fever left. Or it was like something lanced the boil and the boil went away. We're very lucky because that didn't happen in the United States. Trump just keeps getting away with things, and now it looks as if maybe that boil is being lanced. In the country, they're starting to say now. The judges are starting to say, "Well, I don't know if you can go that far or not." And even the Supreme Court is now suggesting that it might begin to take a different tack with him. But in Newburyport, yeah, it was like this wonderful community, and suddenly people were getting angry with each other. And the only way I can describe it was a fever. It was like a fever, and the fever went away.
Kind of a reflection on really kind of the country's national identity too, right? And I like the way Professor Baker kind of framed that a little bit too. And you use this language about that fever and that fever going away. And we know sometimes you just kind of wait things out and everything too. But if you had to suggest just one thing, one takeaway that may be working to kind of mend that community, your community there, in terms of the politics that's happening amidst tension, what would you say that one thing is that might help us lean in nationally?
Well, self-awareness is so important. And there's one thing people say, I don't like to fight. People don't like to fight. That's not true. People love to fight, and all they need is an excuse.
Hmm.
And so you give them that excuse, they're going to go to fighting. And finally, somebody has to step in between you, or you have to have the self-awareness. What the hell am I doing? And I'm not sure that's a good answer for the national level because that is so complex and it's so broad. But in a place like Newburyport, 20,000 people, I think that's basically what it was. And I said so in a column. I said the very same thing. Look what's happening. We've been complaining about what's happening on the national level for so long, and now it's happened to us. And then last night's outcome kind of, made it come back together.
I take hope from that. And there's, this old truism that all politics are local. And I don't know if that's true in our current era, but I do believe that personal relationships are frayed so much in these days because of our relative isolation behind digital screens, behind the ability to just lob, firebombs in social media across the ways, but being able to draw people together. And I think that's what you're saying. Don't let me put words in your mouth, but that a community can remember who it is and hold each other accountable to that.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
Brother King called it radical love, and that's something I've been professing and as y'all know and preaching for over 20 years. And it's just the saying that gets going, which is how do we think about how we love radically? And to love radically, there has to be a level of empathy where we're willing to sit down and see each other for who we are. And that's tough. And that's tough sometimes. I mean, I think we're going to overcome that one day. We are mere humans. We're mere mortals. We're not perfect. That imperfection comes out in different ways. But yet, when we become conscious of those things, and John, you alluded to that earlier in the episode, right? How we think about ourselves can only change that. Look at me. I'm trying to be all poetic here. With a poet here. I don't know if y'all.
You're doing well.
I don't know. Maybe we should actually hear from the poet.
You're doing well. Both of you are doing well. This is wonderful. Thanks for listening to me, but I need to listen to you two some more as well.
My friend, we love having wonderful guests, people who bring a narrative that really kind of shape our experience, allow us to grow, allow people who are listening to grow and think about things too. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure I mentioned, because I've had the distinct pleasure of being able to read some early drafts of your book that is coming out titled Poetry That Matters. Tell us a little bit about your work. And I got to say, I love the section on Emmett Till. That was in there too, but it's not my work to tell. John, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'm trying to frame some of the things that we know or we think we know in a way that we see another side of it. people don't realize when you say the Tallahatchie River, what do you think of? You think of Bobby Gentry's song about a guy that never existed who threw himself, may or may not have thrown himself in the Tallahatchie River. But that's the same river that Emmett Till died in. He was horribly tortured in his life, and then after he died, they continued to ravage his body and then threw it in the Tallahatchie River. My God, that is something we cannot forget. That's the story of the Tallahatchie River. And so that poem came to me one night, and it came out fast and hard, and of course took some editing. But then I thought of his mother as a Madonna, and then compared her to Mary the Madonna, who holds the lifeless Jesus in her arms in the Pietà. And but it's the same way with with Mrs. Till. And she said, "Okay, you're not going to just close the coffin on my boy. I want the world to see what it's done to him." And so what I said, in each case, these people were killed because, like Herod, they were fearful of a child. Think of that. Fearful of a child. These grown men who were racist and violent, and they were threatened by Emmett Till, a 14-year-old. I can't get over that. I can't get over that. It's just it stays with me. I'm so glad that I wrote the poem, and whenever I get a good chance to recite it, I do. But not every situation is good for that. It's kind of a performance poem in a way. So that's what I'm trying to do, even with love and nature, all those obligatory themes that poets have to go. I try to fashion them in a way that I've never heard them before, um, and in what I feel like is a true way. So that's what I'm up to. Um, uh, that's my answer.
Yes. I mean, Professor Beck, I don't know about you, but I mean, I got to tell you, I'm feeling kind of emotional. Just the way you describe that, the religious imagery, and just,
Mm.
I
Yeah, yeah.
It
Yeah,
it is
I love to use religious imagery, even though I don't believe those narratives as they are. They're wonderful stories, and they do tell a truth. But I like to tell them in a way that says, here's what it is when the rubber meets the road, you know? So,
and it is a beautiful image. I grew up in Mississippi, and I appreciate Southern writers. Flannery O'Connor was from Georgia, but she talks about the Christ-haunted South,
mhm.
and that resonates. That phrase was in my head as you were talking about that, because the spiritual and specifically Christian experience in the South, I believe, can be a language and a movement that leads toward redemption in the South, because that is the South's native language. And so to be able to situate that image is a beautiful thing. You may not want to deliver that poem tonight on our show, but I would love to hear you deliver it someday. I would love to hear a poem from you today,
Yeah,
that one, or at least another one from your collection.
I do have one, and it's using Jesus as a figure in it, but in a much different way. Would you mind if I told it? It's about gun violence, and it's titled "Jesus Went to School Today." So would it be all right to do that now as
oh,
we have time?
absolutely, please.
Okay. Jesus went to school today, knapsack on his little back. When one unrestrained that day, prowl the halls for armed attack, though eye of guard and doors shut hard could not forbid a day so marred. Little Jesus saw all he came to save ravaged ere his own flesh died. The day's report marked deep regret. His unspoiled life could not escape such unsuspected harm. Jesus went to university today, not very far away. The gruesome news had reached his ears. The lesson of the day was that much was to be feared, whether classmate, mentor, friend, for mankind sinned through infinity and fallen short of desired divinity. As Jesus kept detailed note on laptop of collected learning, missiles of destruction rang before the bell could ring. His dark and handsome visage vanished from adoration's view. His promised future sorely bared, while halls ran red. The investigation bore a pleading tone of a day of double tragedy. A man named Jesus went to work, and by a grieved coincidence, his doom was saddest consequence. He became a marksman's mark. The inspector's morbid probe made note of a trinity of tragedy, quote, unquote. Gray-haired Jesus spent last earthly days in retirement's place of caring ways, time passed in mind of labors done, then he and all met with brutal gun. A crazed, unwelcome guest intruded with mortal issues of his own dispute. A passing priest fetched from the ground a blood-stained backpack and intoned that Father, Son, and Holy Ghost suffered death that day, that earthly hope was surely lost, for in these hapless murders each and all the world had lost the one they loved the most. We'll still send thoughts and prayers above, but only stop this madness when it's one we really love.
Well, amen. That was potent and beautiful poetry. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Can I just add that that was something that happened to the conservative world when Charlie Kirk died? All of a sudden, it was someone they cared about. And then they want to do something about it. And they can, but you know what? They won't. They won't.
Most important thing we have to do is, right, we gotta lean in terms of how we love, how we think about that day to day, how we live our lives, living a life of consciousness and awareness, where folks want to congregate with us, but they know that we live a life where they see love. Like I said, Brother King's love comes out in many ways. John, I got to ask you, when does your book come out? And how do people listening get a hold of it?
Yeah, okay. The book comes out in early December, which is a good time for it, as you know. And it'll be on Amazon. It'll be, I think, it's going to be in Barnes and Noble. It's going to be on ebooks. And of course, it'll be from the publisher, which is Winter Island Press from Salem, Massachusetts. I've been very pleased with the way the book has been handled, and got along very, very well with the editor and publisher and so forth. And it's been sent to Iowa, where it is being printed. So it'll be out then, and it's called Poetry That Matters. When you look at the title on the cover, which by the way has an abstract painting by by one of the great abstract painters, and but then it says in large letters, poetry matters, but then in the middle in little word it's that poetry that matters. It sounds kind of cheeky, like maybe my poetry is better than anybody else's, but that's not it. It's just that I feel like we ought to be talking about things we need to talk about today.
I think that's so important. And John, as we get to the end here of Race Matters, I just want to remind folks listening that the information heard and deemed on this show do not reflect boards that I sit on or my employer. I know Professor Baker would probably like to echo the same thing as we do every episode.
Yes, I am not speaking on behalf of the University of Alabama, but I'm very happy to be in this conversation with you. And congratulations on the book. Congratulations on the poetry. It is an achievement to be able to publish poetry in the year of our Lord 2025. So congratulations to you on that, and I hope that it's a blessing to the world.
Thank you. I would like to say something to both of you after we go off. Is there a chance to have a personal word with you?
For sure.
My friend, that'll be great. And don't let Jeff fool you as this brilliant legal scholar academic, because, you want to talk about a writer.
Okay.
That's very kind.
I have his book right here in the office, over on the shelf.
That's very kind. I'm not selling my book today. So John, that is all you. And thank you for a lovely conversation today.
Thank you, Jeff. Nice meeting you. And my friend Eddie, bless you for staying with it. Bless you. See you soon, I hope.
Absolutely, absolutely. Folks, this is Race Matters, 96.3 Joppa Radio. Until next time, thank you.